Let me just say welcome. Really excited that you're here with us. This is Deetta Jones. I'm sorry that my video isn't showing right now, or else you'd see that I actually tried to get presentable for all of you. I'm really excited to spend the next hour with you, and particularly with Trevor Dawes, who is a longtime colleague and friend, but also deeply expert, not only in the subject matter related to decision making and management and leadership, but also who brings a tremendous amount of personal experience as a senior leader in a number of different organizations. So is going to make this not just interesting and relevant, but also describe some of his own experiences in ways that hopefully bring out the nuances associated with the topic of decision making. What I'd like to do to begin is to let you know that we are recording this webinar. It will be available on our YouTube channel after the fact, so you are more than welcome to go back and review it and also share it with colleagues and friends. The content of this webinar gives you a sneak peek, a preview into some of the work that we do. The intention of this webinar is to be able to give the broadest possible audience opportunities to have access to professional development tools and ideas, and also engage with other people who are committed to their own ongoing professional development. A lot of the people who participate in these webinars are people who have taken a workshop with us in the past, or for whom we've worked at as part of a strategic planning process, or done leadership training, or equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And what we want to do is extend the learning. We want to make sure that you have opportunities to revisit concepts or issues that were relevant to you, but maybe you lost sight of because there was so much that was presented in a short period of time, or in ways that allow you to go back and reflect on your own changing circumstances and roles in ways that allow you to continue to develop and use your toolkit. For those of you who have not worked with us in the past and who don't have first-person experience with Deetta Jones and Associates, welcome. We hope to continue to develop a relationship with you. We are incredibly excited about the opportunity to share with you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. And also to let you know that we have a lot of different services and resources and products that we're constantly offering, but also revising and revamping and launching that we would also like for you to know about. So this picture over to the right-hand side of your slide is just a portion of our consulting team. Unfortunately, some folks got cropped out. There are more of us in there, but this is a sample of some of the folks who make up our consulting team. And our consulting practice is made up of people who bring diverse perspectives, voices, identities, experiences, industry backgrounds, academic credentials, and also who come from a lot of different professional settings. And so Trevor happens to be a person who has spent his career mostly in libraries and in higher education. But if you look across our consulting practice, we have people with a wide variety and depth and breadth of knowledge in areas of expertise. So we'd love for you to continue to learn about us, and we'd love to learn about you and your needs, and to work with you in any way that helps you, get the results that you're looking for at individual and organizational levels. So the last thing that I'll do before I hand it off to my good friend Trevor is to just remind you that at any point during this presentation, you can send us a message in the chat window. Just make sure that you select in the chat box all panelists and attendees. If you want everyone to see it, which is absolutely appropriate, send it to all panelists and attendees, whatever your comment or question is, and then one of us on the DJA team will take a look and we'll make sure that Trevor has an opportunity to see and answer the question. Okay, so at any point at all, use the chat window, and then there'll also be plenty of opportunity for interacting with Trevor along the way. With that said, Trevor, so excited for you to be here with us. Trevor is the Vice Provost for Libraries, Museums, and the May Morris University Librarian at the University of Delaware in Newark, Delaware. Trevor has had a long and esteemed career and plays a lot of leadership roles at national and international, regional levels, in addition to his role at the University of Delaware, which is more local. And in some magical way, also makes time to be one of the Dieta Jones and Associates consultants and trainers, and so brings his tremendous wisdom to us as a consultant as well. Trevor, welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Dieta. It's certainly sets the expectations high for our participants today. So, as Dieta said, I'm at the University of Delaware, and I've been here just a little over 3 years now. And while we certainly focus on how we contribute to the success of our community members, our students, our faculty, our community, you know, we have also been working intentionally here at the university on changing the culture of the organization. And one of the ways in which we've been doing that is by trying to shift decision-making to the people within the organization where it is most appropriate. Of course, this doesn't mean that I make no decisions. But it means that some decisions are made by teams or by other individuals within the organization, and that's what we'll be talking a bit about today. If you haven't participated in the Library Management Skills Institute, or if you have participated in the Library Management Skills Institute, I should say, you'll recall the various types of decision-making processes that we discussed in that workshop. And so I'll just review them just for a brief minute for those who have not yet participated. And can you go to the next slide, please, Sharon? So we, in the LMSI, we talked about the autocratic, consultative, and participatory decision-making process. And we spoke really about two types of autocratic decision-making styles. Next, Jerome, please. The one where the decision maker, makes all the decisions by myself. And let's say this is the director of the library, although it really could be on the department or team level as well. This really applies to anyone who has the authority to make decisions within the organization. And this person who believes that he or she has all the information they need will make that decision alone and will not necessarily, I will not consult with anyone before that decision is made. I think the style is not uncommon in libraries and in eras past, and some of you might say, this may still even exist in some of your organizations, and it may exist in some of your organizations because there might be times when that decision maker needs to make that decision without consulting others. Jerome, next. A different type of autocratic decision making also involves someone in that authoritative role, but in this case, the person seeks input from others. The decision maker will seek the input, however, on an individual basis. So he or she will consult with each person, say the member of their team, in a one-on-one basis. And the information that they gather may or may not have an impact on the decision that is made, or the people who have been consulted may or may not know until the decision is made whether or not their contributions were even heard. You may also be familiar with this style, and again, some of you might say, this is fairly common in my organization, and in fact, it may still be used in some organizations. What I hope, however, is more common in our organizations are the more consultative styles of decision-making. Next, Jerome. In the first of these two consultative styles, can you show that image, please? Everyone has the opportunity to discuss ideas among themselves and also with the decision maker. There is still one person who makes the decision, though, but the input methods are more dynamic and fluid throughout the organization. Similarly, next image. In this model, The decision maker seeks input from everyone and also shares some of his or her own ideas. And there's an exchange happening, and the information input is not unidirectional. In these models, those who are consulted generally believe that their ideas are valued, especially because the conversations are multi-directional, and the decision maker is not only gathering information before making a decision, seemingly in isolation, but he or she is actually gathering information and sharing information, perhaps more importantly. I would argue that many decision makers believe this is the style that they employ. This is certainly the style that we have begun to use most frequently at the University of Delaware Library, Museums, and Press. So for example, the Library Executive Council, our senior leadership team, uses this model quite frequently. There are many decisions I have to make about policies or practices, and I'll consult with the team. We'll have a discussion about the pros and cons of each of the ideas that are presented, and then often, not all the time, I will make a decision. But this is still not what we consider to be a participatory decision-making process. It's consultative in that only one person makes the decision, even though he or she consults with others. Next slide. In participatory decision-making, the group or the collective really makes the decision. And so in this drawing is my attempt at making each of these people equal in size to show that they have an equal say in the decision. This is not easy to accomplish, especially because we're so accustomed to working in the environments where one or more of the previously described styles are more common. And although it's more complicated, the participatory decision style can lead to better outcomes because of the process involved of generating ideas, soliciting feedback, and reaching a mutually agreed upon consensus as to how to proceed. And we do this often in our meetings and in other spaces. In this model, the group allows time for ideas to surface around the decision that needs to be made. The merits of the ideas are debated, and they're reviewed and narrowed to a smaller list of ideas from which a decision is ultimately made. And yes, we might do this instinctively, but there's actually a formalized process that can be followed to ensure a positive and inclusive outcome. Next slide. This is but one resource that defines the participatory decision-making style and the process involved. Sam Kainer is regarded as one of the nation's leading experts, actually global experts on collaborative decision-making. He's the senior author of the book whose cover is shown here, Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision-Making. And he's sought after by clients nationally and globally for his expertise in designing and facilitating collaborative efforts to achieve system-wide change. This is, again, only one source, but one that I do recommend. Next slide, please. In Kainer's work, the participatory decision-making model has 4 distinct phases: the divergent zone, the convergent zone, the closure zone, and the decision point. Of course, this assumes that you already have an identified topic to be discussed that will ideally result in a decision to be made by the group. And so let's look at each of the 4 phases. It's often referred to as a decision-making diamond because you start with a topic, and as you move from left to right across the diagram, there's this point of divergence where a lot of ideas are collected and gathered and shared. The ideas are being generated, and this is not the time to start thinking about the decision. You're really just generating ideas at this point. In the middle, there's opportunity for discussion about the ideas, right? So this is where you talk about the pros and cons of each. You then begin to sort of narrow the field by discussing why these ideas would or would not work in the organization. But everyone has the opportunity to share their thoughts and ideas about each of the proposals that have been developed and shared. As you begin to narrow the field, moving further to the right, you come to the point of convergence, where the number of ideas have been reduced, say, from whatever number you had initially to a smaller number that will then lead to the end, to that closure zone, where a single or maybe two ideas are finally presented that leads to then that decision point, which would then obviously lead to a course of action based on the decision that has been made. Let's talk about each of these. Next slide, please. In the divergent zone, as I mentioned, this is where ideas are being generated and all the alternatives are being presented, or as many alternatives as are shared by the participants in this process. It's an opportunity for open discussion, and everyone should have the opportunity to share their ideas. You're gathering diverse points of view, multiple perspectives, and you're really hashing out the difficult conversations about what each of these ideas are bringing. This is not the time, as I mentioned, to begin to judge the ideas. You're really just generating the ideas at this point. Next slide, please. As you move towards the convergent zone, this is where you begin to summarize the key points of each of the ideas that have been generated and sorting the ideas. And there are many ways that you can sort the idea. Some of you are probably familiar with affinity grouping, for example, used a lot in many libraries. And you're evaluating the alternatives, you're evaluating the pros and cons of each of these ideas, and you're fine-tuning the proposals that have been presented. This is also the point at which you're strengthening for the ideas that sort of rise to the top, then you're strengthening the logic, making the arguments for this idea above the other ideas, other proposals that have been submitted, and then moving towards a conclusion. Next slide, please. In the closure zone, this is where you begin to wind down the discussion. You've already had the conversations about the pros and cons of each of the proposals that have been submitted. You've clarified them and talked about the logic behind each. And so now you're further clarifying, polling the group members to get their sense of agreement or support with the idea, and then moving towards that decision. It's important for the group to know how the decision will be made, and in that process, because everyone has had the opportunity to share their ideas and discuss their ideas and talk about the benefits of each, then you may be able to reach a decision. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat and I see that someone's hearing an echo. I hope that goes away. I'm not sure that there's anything that I can do to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I don't hear one either. If other people hear an echo, let us know, but it may be a local, and I'm sorry that that's not a good answer, but let us know if anyone else does.
Can you go to the next slide, please? So once you've gone through that process of clarifying and coming to the decision, once that decision is made, it really leads to the action that has to be taken relative to that decision. And you've gone through this process, this rather inclusive process, meaning at this point, there should no longer be any disagreements or alternative points of view, because those had the opportunity to surface during that divergent zone where all the ideas were to be generated. Next slide. So this is back to the summary. So through this process, there is enough time allocated for each phase to ensure that all the ideas are heard and discussed. This could be, this process could be a few minutes if you need to make a decision urgently, say within the context of a single meeting, or it could be hours or days depending on the timing of the work group. What's important is that everyone in the group also agrees at the outset that they will abide by the decision of the group, even if they personally are not 100% on board, but they recognize that the decision, because that was made via this process, is one with which they can live. Without this explicit agreement at the beginning of the process, there's a potential that the decision could face sabotage, which of course you don't want to have. This participatory decision-making process can be highly effective and can ensure that a diversity of opinions are presented and vetted when making a decision. It may not be effective or appropriate for every decision, however. Next slide. You'll want to use this style, perhaps in a committee setting, because it allows for everyone in the committee to have a voice, and it adds some equity to the process that can sometimes be dominated by the loudest or the strongest voices. It could also be used when a group has a clear charge to make a decision. So if the group has not been given the decision-making authority, they should not necessarily use this model, although it can be used even when the group has been charged with making a recommendation, because the process of reaching that recommendation is a similar one. Here at the University of Delaware, for example, a digital collections policy group was formed, and they used this method recently after there was a lot of news, national news about yearbooks and other historical documents being canvassed to locate potentially offensive material on college campuses. So we asked this group to determine how best we should respond, or really not respond, but to act in anticipation of this happening here at UD. So the group got together. I wasn't a part of the process, but they agreed that a warning on the website of the documents or yearbooks and student newspapers would be sufficient. And they also created the language that now appears on the websites of those newspapers and the student newspaper and yearbooks. Search committees are another place where this process can be used. Although this is a little tricky because in searches you have objective criteria, or hopefully you have objective criteria on which you're evaluating the candidates, but the principles of the process may be used in that setting. Again, here at UD, our search committees are charged with making a recommendation to the vice provost, to me. And because I know that they use this process, there has only been one instance where I've made a decision that is not aligned with the recommendation, and that's because there were broader organizational priorities that I needed to consider. But in each case, however, the committee is aware that their job is to make a recommendation, and in that case where I didn't accept their recommendation, I shared as much information as I could about why I went in a different direction than that which they recommended. Participatory decision-making can also be used when decisions about policies or work processes have an impact on a group. And ideally, the affected group would be involved in that process of making the decision about that which will affect their work. Again, this process can be managed in a short meeting, or it could be longer depending on the magnitude of the decision or how much time is available. The idea is to allot sufficient time for each segment of the process, for each of those 4 zones. Doing so generally engenders more buy-in with the decision that has been made because everyone has had the opportunity to participate, and people generally take ownership of that which they weren't instrumental in creating. Next slide, please. As good as a process as participatory decision-making is, it is not always appropriate. I can think in my role when we make personnel decisions, so outside of the search committee process, these are more consultative. I'll consult with HR staff before making decisions. Decisions also about budgets or sensitive information, or sometimes if there's a decision that needs to be made quickly, so the timing may be a factor. Decisions about a strategy or strategic direction are also sometimes best made in a more consultative manner. Again, using a UD example, our decision to participate in a joint state digital project, I consulted with the staff in the areas that will be most directly impacted. In general, I think if the decision maker needs to move forward on a project or a new direction, it's important to consult with others to get input and to understand the potential ramifications of that decision. But these need not be a full-blown participatory decision-making process. So I know that I covered the subject fairly quickly at the time that we have allotted, but I hope it was sufficient enough of an overview to help you understand the various types of decision-making: autocratic, consultative, and participatory, and when it might be appropriate to use each. In any organization, there will, or there should never be, or there should be more than one style in use. Although not a style that I use personally, the autocratic style is one that does not have a place. It does not have a place in this organization because I mentioned at the outset, we're trying to change the culture of the organization here at the University of Delaware. And that style does not fit in with the values of our organization. So with that, I'll say thank you. And ask if there are any questions. Jerome, next slide. It seems there are some questions. You can type those in the chat box. So there's curious as to why decisions about strategy or whether to move forward with a new direction should not be participatory. This seems like a crucial. So yes, Laura, that's actually, you know, there's strategy, sort of big strategy. So like if we were developing a strategic plan, for example, and I'll use the University of Delaware as an example here again, because this was, we went through a strategic planning process, which was entirely staff-led with the help of a consultant. But that was a process that I personally was not involved in. Because the staff needed to be the ones to develop our strategic plan. What by strategy in the context, I meant maybe smaller items. So the example of becoming a member of a joint state digital library program. That was a strategic decision. And one in which we consulted with the folks in our Digital Scholarship Center, the folks in our Systems Center, and the folks in our Reference and Instruction and Special Collections. It was a lot of consultation. So you might say that was participatory, but the process was one that was more consultative rather than participatory in the way that that structure is defined. But consulting with many of the people, with all of the people who would be impacted by that decision was important. And I considered that a strategic decision in forming those alliances with the state library here in Delaware and in New Jersey, the other state with which we're partnering. So I hope that answers your question. Are there other questions?
I have a question, Trevor. This is Dieta. You alluded to really trying to change the culture at the university when you got there. Why was that? What was your reasoning for saying, you know what, we need a culture change? Because of course the university and the library already had a positive and a strong culture. So what was the reason for you to say we need to make some cultural changes?
Sure, absolutely. So I arrived in this position, as I mentioned, 3 years ago, and I arrived after a director who had served in this position for a long time, over 30 years, over 35 years. And she, not good, bad, right, or wrong, had a different style than, a different leadership style than I did, a style that was certainly, I think, prevalent among library directors of the time that she became a director here at the university, one that was more of that autocratic style where all the decisions were made, I'm in my office, in this office. And so, and that has not been the style, and so that's not my style. And this was the culture of the organization to which everyone who had worked here, many of whom had worked here for more than 10 years as well, and some of whom, some of the staff for whom this was their only place of employment, and so this was the only style of management that they knew. And so I have a much more, as I've been describing, either consultative or participatory style of management. And so that is one aspect of the culture that we have been working to change. And I hope the staff would say successfully. There are other aspects of the culture also that we have been working on, and being more inclusive and valuing respect, respectful not only of ourselves within the library, museums, and press, but also externally on the campus and broader community. Being a lot more externally facing. I mean, there are a host of issues, but for the purposes of decision making, that is certainly one aspect of the culture we wanted to change.
Trevor, there's another question that came in from Laura, and just so that you can take a moment and read it and catch your breath, I'm going to jump in with a quick response and then give you a moment to think, okay? So Laura says, I think one challenge I see in organizations is who gets to decide what decision-making process should be used. If one person gets to decide when they get input and when they can be autocratic, isn't it still an autocratic environment overall? So Trevor, you think for a moment, and I'm going to jump in and say, one of the things that I think Trevor has modeled really brilliantly over the years in his leadership role, which is also consistent with the philosophy that we espouse and try to bring to our work, is that decision-making is one of the most important kind of functions, systems and processes in organizations as far as having a positive impact on organizational culture, particularly trust. It's the doggonedest thing. When people talk about trust or communication, 9 times out of 10, if you drill down and really get a sense of what is it specifically that people are saying needs to be done differently or better, it's really about decision making. And then the major follow-up to that is, what is the style of decision making that's being used for particular decisions? And so the question that you're raising is exactly the thing that is raised most of the time, but it shows itself in many, many ways, which is why decision making is such an important topic to really grasp and to think about. 2, the other thing that's really important about decision making is that it doesn't sit in isolation related to decision making is just one of many functions. Decision making, like many other systems and processes, and behaviors, should be aligned with individual and organizational values. And individual values hopefully have some alignment with organizational values. The reason why Trevor was appointed, hopefully for his role, is because there's a strong alignment between his personal and professional values and the organization's values. And then his leadership philosophy is about enacting in practice ways for those values to take hold in the organization. And decision-making is one of many ways, but also a particularly powerful way that we can show our values in action in the organization in a way that allows us to build more inclusivity, that allows us to nurture trust, that allows us to have more transparency and communication, and the sorts of things that really allow for people to be more engaged and to be more willing to take risks and kind of get through tough times together. So I just want to mention, the importance of decision-making as far as a process, but also the importance of thinking about it in the context of values, and how starting with values is absolutely essential rather than thinking of decision-making in isolation.
Yeah, thanks. I think, it's certainly important to align your values with the decision making. And I would also add that it depends on it does depend on the decision, Laura. So there are times when, again, because of the culture that existed here at UD, when someone will come to me with the expectation that I will make a decision. And I don't know whether you would consider this autocratic if I turn it back around and say, this is really about your department, so you should work with your team, or this really has broader impact on the whole organization, so we should put a work group together, or I'm not sure whether you consider that autocratic if I am delegating that responsibility. But I think it's important when, if someone's going to be impacted, or if a department or work group is going to be impacted by a decision that needs to be made, at the very least, that group needs to be consulted. So, we're using that consultative decision-making style, or if it's a decision that, maybe requires the participatory decision, like the strategic planning that I said, that's going to impact maybe the whole organization, then, we use that process. Even within the work group, if it's only one group, one team that's going to be affected, sometimes that team will use this process, because we've had a lot of experience now with this style of decision making, and some of the departments here will actually use the decision making diamond and the points of agreement that I mentioned earlier as well. But it may be a fine line, but I actually don't, at least here, I don't see that as an autocratic process at all, because we, in fact, the library management team, we involve everyone in the process whenever there's a decision that needs to be made. And sometimes, even though I'm the one who makes the decision, it is, I was going to say rare, and I'm thinking of a time that I've actually made a decision without consulting, but none come to mind immediately. There's, if it's a decision about a budget, I'll consult with our budget director. A decision about HR, I'll consult with our HR people at minimum. And there may be others that are consulted as well.
Sure, we have a number of questions coming in. So let me start up top with Melissa, who says, we're getting ready to start discussions on strategic planning in an academic library environment where the expectation is shared governance. I'm wondering how we can move forward. Do you have any ideas or suggestions?
Whew, that's a tough one, Melissa. I think how you move forward is really going to be dependent on the organizational culture at that institution. Right. So if the culture is one that values this participation, that values this inclusivity, that values these types of processes, then I think suggesting that the process be one that works, and I'll use intentionally the phrase bottom up, because that's sort of how our process here worked. If the culture, though, is one that does not value those things that I mentioned, it may be a little difficult it may be difficult to move in that direction. However, that should not prevent you or others who believe that this is the way that you should be going to suggest that maybe we should develop a work group or strategic planning team that is inclusive of staff from different parts of the organization or from different levels of the staff, or tenure, non-tenure if you're in a if you're in a tenure, non-tenure environment, or making sure that there's a representative group of people on the strategic planning team to help develop that process. But it really, I think the first place to look is to examine the culture of that organization and whether that idea is even going to be one that is going to be received and acted upon in the way that perhaps your question suggests you want it to.
The next question is, what other tools or approaches can we use to facilitate better participatory decision making, especially when a group isn't used to operating this way?
Yeah, so I mentioned that the decision making diamond is one tool, but this is something that we do often in work groups. And we have these ideas, we throw these ideas out. I mentioned affinity grouping, for example, where you can have ideas up and you use sticky notes to group them on the wall, and by like themes. That's another approach that could be used depending on the decision whether that would be appropriate. I like this model because of the structure that it adds, and it's one that can be easily shared with members of the organization, with team members in the organization. It provides the right structure, and then each group will determine the amount of time that they need to spend on that process. It's better not to be done, in the span of one meeting. So, you probably don't want to, if it's especially depending on the magnitude or seriousness of the decision that needs to be made, you want to spend more than, say, 10 minutes on generating ideas, or you want to spend the bulk of the time on the idea generation, because that's where you're going to get a lot of people involved in thinking and strategizing and being heard, feeling valued, feeling respected because their ideas are being heard. And so if you had only a short time, then I would spend more time on the idea generation piece, and then less time on the sort of narrowing and getting to the decision. But I think we use this tool perhaps instinctively in many of our meetings, but what this does is allow for more equity, which is one of the reasons I like this tool. It provides the structure for equity within the decision-making process.
And Trevor, I want to echo something that you just said about if you have to err on the side of spending more time on one part of this process over the other, spend it on the divergence, right? The part where you're exploring and opening up ideas. And and a lot of times what happens is groups get excited about the number, when the idea generation, what's the greatest number of ideas we can come up with, and then quickly move to the consolidation of ideas, which is the convergent stage. The tricky part is that staying in that stage a little bit past generation and before going into convergence is really important. And that's where the discussion and exploration and unpacking of ideas creates that equity. And you reinforce this, but I just want to kind of say it again, that equity is really about not just having an idea that's been positioned on a board for consideration, but where we actually are starting to get a sense of where people are coming from, what might some of the potential hurdles be, where are some of the preferences, taking advantage of the skills and perspectives that people are bringing from different backgrounds and different parts of the organization or with different strengths So really using that as an opportunity to unpack and to also fully explore issues with your colleagues before moving to the Convergent usually helps a lot with people feeling more comfortable moving into the Convergent, where they're starting to consolidate ideas and come up with a smaller set of choices, because they have a better understanding of not just the criteria, but how it is that they can apply the criteria now that they have the nuances that have been shared with them by their colleagues.
So Bonnie says, we're in the process of looking at our climate qual data and looking towards making decisions regarding goals and action items. This seems like a helpful model to allow for the messiness of divergence in order to build engagement. Absolutely. As I mentioned in the chat in response, we also conducted a climate qual assessment here in 2017, and we developed a team that a representative team that looked at the results and made recommendations on how we should move forward. And many of those recommendations have been implemented to the extent that we could within budget, and but many of those recommendations have been implemented. And it is difficult, Laura, to know when to consult and when to be more participatory, to use a more participatory approach. Sometimes it's really up to that team, because the library management team will say, here's a team that needs to make the decision, or here's a team that needs to make the recommendation. And that team will decide what process they use, but it depends on who the decision maker is, or what the decision is that needs to be made.
The other thing that I would say about that is that it's also about who do you want to own the decision at the end. And if you have responsibility for owning it because it's your job, literally, or that ownership resting with you makes good sense and would be fine as far as the ability to implement the idea, then consulting is probably an easy preference. But participatory is oftentimes, the scales are tipped towards participatory when there's a strong desire for ownership to be more shared and for higher levels of accountability. But it does take more time. So of course there are criteria, yeah.
So Anne asks that in our employee engagement survey, one of the items that received an unfavorable rating was, quote, the directors and executives do a good job of listening to employees' ideas and feedback, end quote. Do you think the structure you outlined can work to help us with this, at helping ideas get heard and demonstrating that we're listening, especially with regard to matters that affect our staff? I'd say two things. Yes, I think this could, if the employees believe that they're not being heard or listened to, particularly around decisions that are being made, then yes, this is a process that could definitely help if it involves more staff members in the decision-making process, especially those that affect the work that they do. Unrelated, but one of the things that came out of our climate qual assessment was also the idea that we were not listening to or hearing ideas that were being generated by the staff. And so we created a strategic, what we call a strategic initiatives committee. And in this committee, staff members across the organization have the opportunity to submit ideas that enhance or create new services that are aligned with the strategic directions, that can save us money, or I forget there's a fourth criteria, but that can meet any or all of the criteria. The idea, once it's submitted to the committee, becomes the idea of the committee. And that's done intentionally to eliminate bias, because whether positive or negative bias, right? Because some people could say, oh, Anne has all the great ideas, or Anne's ideas are always just, crap. And so by owning the idea, then the committee works with stakeholders across the organization to gather input. They will put together a project brief that will have, budget and staffing implications. And then they make a recommendation to the library management committee. There's also, and I think an important step, there's a call for comments. So everyone in the organization has the opportunity to comment on the brief. It then is tweaked if necessary based on the comments, then comes to the library management committee with a recommendation or not to move forward. We've moved forward on a few ideas so far. We've actually implemented 1 idea, and we're in the process of implementing 3 ideas at the moment. And there are a few ideas that we have not moved forward with. They weren't the right time. One we thought was a good idea, but it wasn't the right time in terms of budget. Another, and the others we thought, these weren't right for us. But in all cases, the person who submitted the idea gets that feedback from the committee. Here's all of the stuff, the work that we did. Here's the recommendation that we made to the library management committee. So even though the idea did not move forward, they understand why it did not move forward. And I think that's just as important. Hope that helps.
Anything else, anyone? We have just a couple more minutes. Anything? Okay. So Trevor, any last?
Yes, thank you. So I don't, were the readings distributed to the registrants?
No, we put them here in the citations to make sure that everyone has them.
So here are a list of readings that we'll touch upon, this decision making, and I've got a summary of each of these that can be shared if anyone's interested. So just let us know. We'll be happy to send those to you. And thank you so much for your time today. And I'll turn this back over to you, Deanna, to wrap us up.
Okay, thank you so much, Trevor. Okay, everyone, I told you Trevor was awesome. I am so honored to be such good friends with Trevor for many years now. Thank you so much for that session, Trevor. It was, obviously you prepared a lot. You brought a lot of your own personal perspective. It was incredibly helpful. Folks, the webinar will continue to be available on our YouTube channel in an archive form. So please go ahead and visit us, join the YouTube channel. We will continue to post all of our free monthly webinars there. So join us and comment and tell us what it is that you'd like to see more of in the future. And we will design our webinar series content around your suggestions. So please share with us and we will design accordingly. The other thing that I want to make sure you know about is our signature program, which is called the Inclusive Managers Communication Toolkit, which is an 8-week online program that is jam-packed with all the best of everything that we know related to leadership and management and strategy and creating equity, diversity, and inclusion in your organizational roles as leaders and as managers, and in a way that is integrated with the leadership and management work that you already do, and that helps align and advance your organizational strategies and values. So this is not an equity, diversity, inclusion course, and it's not just a management course, and it's not just a leadership course, and it's not just a strategy course. It's all of those things in an 8-week online program that also has weekly webinars and chat sessions and office hours with the DJA team as your faculty members, and a lot of resources that pulls together the best of what we know and have been offering to clients around the world for many years now. So please check us out and register. We would absolutely love to have all of you be part of that experience with us this fall. And we look forward to working with you. And if you have any questions, please just reach out to us. send us a message at info@deettajones.com, and we will respond with any information that we can provide you with. Okay, my friends, thank you again for joining us. We look forward to working with you in the future and hopefully being part of the Inclusive Managers Communication Toolkit. Trevor, thank you again. Jerome, thank you for your amazing behind the scenes work. And have a great day, everyone.